Welcome to part 4 of the overview of the Academic Success Plan for Kids initiative presented by A Stronger Foundation. I'm Dr. Small, Executive Director of A Stronger Foundation. In the first two videos, I introduced the inspiration and evolution of the Academic Success Plan for Kids. In video 3, I made a case for a stronger foundation using the COVID-19 pandemic episode that exposed the educational shortcomings worldwide. I will focus on the learning gap development process in this fourth video. By the end of the video, I want my audience to understand how learning gaps develop and widen over time to present long-term academic limitations and lifelong implications. I used the pandemic scenario in video 3 as evidence of the poor educational standings of most learners. We witnessed a slow yet progressive derailing of children from their highest academic potential to their lowest mediocre state. Although it feels eerily empowering to blame and accuse the educational system of poor instructional delivery, the education system is reasonably intact. I will also show you how the educational system, as we know it, is designed to separate the wheat from the chaff strategically. The educational system is not weak. It's tactful in deciphering those who will from those who won't succeed in life. This system allows the weak and the strong to learn together until a season of separation where the weak suddenly diminishes in what I call a fall off system. This natural pruning serves to isolate society's leaders and followers, the CEOs from the employees, the brains from the bricks, the rich from the poor. Are you following me? By the conclusion of this video, I hope you will see learning gaps in a new way. I encourage everyone not to ignore these learning gaps. I'm going to share a brief story to make my point. I live in a beautiful lakefront community that I purposefully chose because of the lake view. Since the time I moved in, the lake has always been well kept and a manicured look has been maintained that is aesthetically pleasing to the eyes. When it comes to lakes, I prefer it when they are nicely manicured or freshly mowed, yielding a smooth finish along the periphery. But suddenly, a year later, tall grass and multiple species began to grow on the water's surface, producing a more natural and shaggier look along the lake periphery. It was an unpleasant eyesore that kept worsening as the grass grew further into the water, essentially decreasing the overall circumference of the visible water. So thankfully, I secured a meeting with the lake maintenance company to express my displeasure and request a lake restoration to the perfectly mowed look I loved. The lake maintenance manager was a true conservationist. He listened to my complaints and agreed to fix what I saw as a problem. However, as he began to offer the corrective options, he began to educate me on the benefits of the tall water grass around the lake, or the vegetative buffers as they are called. Vegetative buffers, he said, act as a filtering system that traps harmful algae while allowing a balance of essential nutrients. Furthermore, he said, they're very beneficial as a habitat for good wildlife and a barrier for nuisance wildlife like mosquitoes and other insects. He told me the weeds would be trimmed, but he said, did you know these buffers significantly minimize shoreline erosion by limiting the degree of sediments that make it into the water? I thought to myself, wow, This sounds incredible. I never knew the significance of these plants. As we began to confirm the service dates to remove the shrubs, his final comment resonated with me and contributed to my education ideology. He explained that the vegetative buffers I see would only grow so far into the water and no more. This feature got my attention because my issue with this buffer was that I thought it would continue to grow until vegetative buffers covered the entire lake. He assured me there was a drop off zone. Once the buffers reach a set level in the lake, they would grow no further because there would be no more earth beneath to support them. That's all I needed to hear because once I heard that there was a drop off zone, I had nothing to worry about because now I knew I wasn't going to lose my entire lake view. So here is the correlation between this story and how learning gaps result in a restrictive drop off of learning, limiting students' success in secondary education and life. I consider it ironic that all students are equally educated, but due to learning gaps, a lot of children, when they get to that drop off zone and they all get there, this is the position where they fall away and experience the great divide, a concept I will develop in a subsequent video. In the analogy, some form of support is necessary to prevent sinking and drowning at the drop off zone. The adequately educated children can use their solid educational foundation as a rowboat and paddle across the lake to connect with the next phase. If you're following my analogy, the other kids with tons of gaps in their rowboats begin to sink because they do not have the momentum or the foundation to keep them afloat. And so they drop off. So if you ever wonder how some people grow up to achieve greatness while others struggle, what I will show you will be quite helpful. I will show you how choosing to ignore or remove learning gaps can make a difference in your child's education in terms of what achievement level they gain. Basically, if no action is taken, every child will experience the drop off zone. And without a firm education foundation, they will sink and drown. I know it's provocative, but I genuinely believe this is the decisive bridge separating students who thrive from those who essentially fail. Some parents think their child's educational advancements and the degree to which the child achieved is a factor of chance, but it's not a factor of chance. You can structure a child's learning to achieve academic greatness by securing their education foundation through an academic success plan. Let me show you a quick demonstration of how learning gaps develop and how you can control their impact on students' education. I want to warn you that you are about to see an older recording of a lesser quality. I created this video that you're about to see a few years ago before having access to better recording resources. And I decided to use it in this video as a clipping because of how thoroughly it explains the process I want you to understand. So let's begin by taking a look at the taxonomy of learning. Okay, this is a taxonomy of learning, and what it is, it's basically a format that many curriculums follow. Taxonomy of learning are science-based, and they've been developed as a guide for curriculum from kindergarten or preschool all the way through grad school. This particular taxonomy of learning was put out by Harvard University. Okay, So just in general, I want to share this with you before I begin to talk about the learning gaps so that you can get an understanding of what's happening. All right, so on this taxonomy of learning, here we have, I would say, steps. Here you have step 1, here, step 2, step 3, step 4, okay? Now, in each grade level, the curriculum is based off of a similar taxonomy of learning. Now, if it's put out by a different company, it may look a little different. For example, instead of remembering being here, it may say, I know some of them will say knowledge, okay? And that's fine. It's the same idea, okay, based on the same psychological findings, okay? Great. It's just a general outline for curriculums. So in each grade level, you want the student to master the entire curriculum. So if it's kindergarten, you want this kindergartner to master all of these steps for each standard that is taught in kindergarten. If it's first grade, you want your first grader to master each step in the taxonomy for every standard that is taught in first grade. Okay? So basically, here, let me make it a little bigger for you. So here at the first basic step, the foundation, you begin with remembering, just being able to recall information, memorizing information, being able to define information to tell what something means. Okay, that's what happened when a child first begins to learn a standard in their grade level. So after they master the first step, then the teacher attempts to take them to the next step of understanding, just being able to make sense out of the new information that they have. Okay, then the teacher will take them to the next level, and we're talking about the same exact standard. This is the process for every standard that is taught. For the child to really understand the standard, they should be able again to master each of these steps. Remembering, understanding, applying, okay? And that's when the student knows the information so well, beyond understanding it, now they can actually use the information in a new situation, but similar, right? And then you go up to analyzing, evaluating, and creating, okay? So that is the goal whenever a teacher teaches a new skill, okay? When each of these steps are not mastered, gaps develop, okay? So for example, if a new standard was taught to your kindergartner or your first grade, and they mastered this step, so they're good at remembering what the definition is. They know what definitions are. They can describe the particular concept. They can list information about the concept, okay? But when they get to understanding, when the teacher moves on, sharing activities for the child to demonstrate understanding and be able to make sense out of the information. If the child only understands this a half, like half of it makes sense to the child, then the other half will be a gap. Okay, she's mastered it halfway, you have a gap there. Okay. Then the teacher will move on to the next step. They have to. Now, if your child is only able to understand a part of it, maybe a third of this, then you have a gap. You have a gap, right? 2/3 will be your gap. Now, as this process continues, if these gaps are not closed, then you can imagine for each skill, each standard that is taught. And all of these gaps that can develop, if they're not closed or if they're not dealt with, then you see what will happen ultimately. So in each grade level, I mean, you have quite a bit of standards that must be taught. And if your child is developing gaps, then of course that's going to be a problem. All right, so let's move on. I tried my best to get you just to understand what this taxonomy of learning is all about. But let's move forward. All right, so learning gaps are disconnections in learning that hinders comprehension of a concept. Okay, again, that's what learning gaps are. They're basically disconnections in learning. Because why was it that the child was able to master a third of this, but not the other two-thirds? Not the other two-thirds. Okay? Could it have been that when the child was here at the understanding level, whatever was missed, whatever disconnection occurred here, prevents them from mastering here, and then same when you get here to the higher step in the taxonomy of learning. So basically, learning gaps cause disconnections in learning that hinders comprehension of a concept, okay, the complete concept. So how do they form? A natural process when the brain grasps selective information. That's how we learn as human beings. Our brain naturally will grab some information faster than others. Sometimes it totally kicks out or rejects certain type of information, maybe because it's difficult to learn, maybe because the brain just is not interested in that particular topic. Okay, so we have a very selective way that we pull in information. Our brain is very selective. Okay, so that's just how the process occurs. Okay, it's just a natural process when the brain grasps selective information. So that means that it happens to just about everyone. Let's talk about how it develops. Okay, like we say, gaps develop when they're left ignored, when they're neglected, when they're not attended to. So why is it significant? It's significant because each level builds on the prior level. Therefore, missing gaps creates sinking. Okay? When you ignore those gaps, it's going to result in a collapse or a sinking. So in general, as each standard is taught to your child, unless your child understands the concept to the degree in which each of these steps are mastered, then your child will have gaps. Okay? So now knowing that, let's move on and change our discussion a bit. Let's take a look at the foundations, okay? And here we're going to have foundations, okay? So let's go ahead and just draw two foundations, okay? One will be weak and one will be strong. We'll talk about how each will develop and occur. Okay, so let's do this. Okay. And let's do one more. Oh dear, it's not quite straight. Okay, great. Okay. Okay, so let's make this level here our cutoff zone here. This will be our drop-off zone. Okay, so here, let's go ahead and label. Here we have 5th grade, 4th grade, 3rd grade, 2nd grade, and let's just start with 1st grade, okay? So here we have 1st grade, and here we'll call this side a stronger foundation. The weaker foundation will be on the opposite side, okay? So here's what happens. In 1st grade, write it in, we'll just say stronger, and we'll say weak over here. Weak foundation, strong foundation. So now in 1st grade, the teacher begins to teach a certain concept. Okay, so now this particular student, okay, remember we talked about all the steps, and in all the steps, this student, all of it got shaded in. That means all the steps were mastered. Okay, and we'll just leave one blank. Okay, okay, over here, this student basically, for whatever reason, just developed a lot more gaps. Okay, so let's just say we had 2 area mastered very well, but as you can see, there are more gaps. Okay, so think about what happens as these students move on to 2nd grade. As the students move on to 2nd grade, new standards are taught. Okay, so we have new standards being taught, and so basically, you have to understand that each level and each standard builds on the prior standard. For example, that's the way they teach in school. Okay, so in kindergarten, for example, basic addition may be introduced. Okay, so let's say in kindergarten, if basic addition was introduced, they may give your child objects to count and to put in groups, so that you can see a group of 3 Skittles and a group of 2 Skittles. When you combine those, what do you get? Okay, by 1st grade, they're actually getting numbers. Okay, and the teacher is going to show them how, okay, this addition occur in the same kind of way, the 3 and the 2, but maybe now they're using numbers. And then by 2nd grade, they're using double digits. Okay, so you can see that when it was introduced in 1st grade, kindergarten or 1st grade, how important it was that your child understood the basic concepts of addition, because when they get to 2nd grade, it's going to build on it. Okay, so now the child is in 2nd grade. This student had a good foundation from 1st grade, so now it was easy for them to transfer this information. When they learned it in 2nd grade, it wasn't a big thing. Now they had a gap here, as you could see. There was a gap right here. So now that's going to affect this student in 2nd grade, okay? But let's say that the parent leaves it unattended, okay? It'll be damaging, because then when you get to the next grade, then you'll have a problem. This problem can continue. But I do want to show you how that'll be one space. That'll be one gap as compared to what's happening here. Let's go on back over here where we had our student that based on what the child mastered in the prior year, okay, earlier in the standard, they had a foundation in these 2 areas, but remember there were gaps in the other places. So because there were gaps, the teacher basically had to start over from scratch with this child that's missing a gap below. So then the child was able to understand the information, but not fully because of the gap. Remember, there's a gap there, so only a partial understanding, and still a big gap in this concept. Okay, maybe the same thing occurred here. Maybe the child was able to grab on to a little bit, but because of the foundation of that skill that's missing, that gap, it's preventing your child from completely mastering that particular standard. Okay, and it continues. It just continues. All right. And then when they get to third grade and the similar standard, because remember, each year the standards are repeated. The only difference is that they build on each other. Okay, so based on the taxonomy that we showed you, then maybe at that point, even if the child was unable, oh, here it is, even if the child was unable to get to analyzing in kindergarten, because that skill will be revisited, maybe now they'll be able to get up to analyzing. Okay, now don't forget the goal each school year is for the child to be able to master each of these steps on each standard, because unless that is done, then that's a gap that's going to hold your child back. Because when your teacher has to reteach, you're holding up you're holding up the progress. Okay, and there is no way for a teacher to thoroughly reteach the entire skill that was intended for a year before. Because think about it, if a teacher should try and reteach the first grade standard completely, then that teacher will not be able to thoroughly complete the requirement for the new grade, if you really think about it. Okay, so we already talked about here with the foundation of the stronger student, or let's say a stronger foundation, and we did talk about what if one gap was ignored. Okay, so let's say now that we moved on to the third grade year, and this student has been on a roll with this particular standard and this standard, so they're still having a strong foundation. Oh, and I do want to say, okay, look at this right here. Even though the child had a nice strong foundation, somehow this particular skill got a little tricky and the child was only able to master it in part. Okay, but the parent realized that. Okay, we talked about in the other videos, we talked about different types of parents and how they respond to their child's education. Okay, so let's say this was parent number 3 that is on it. What this parent is going to do, they're going to say, wait a minute now. Okay, I see that there's another gap. So they're going to maybe just hire a tutor, maybe that'll take care of, that's one area. Hire a little tutor, takes care of that. And then maybe the tutor will again begin to just help to fill this area in, just to actually fill this area in a little bit, because this was missing. So maybe now, and I'm going to make that this color because that's the year that it got taken care of. So maybe with a tutor, this area now got completed, and maybe just halfway here. Okay. But you can clearly see that compared to here with the weaker student, the gaps are almost insignificant here. And the parent is on it, so they're taking care of it. They're doing something about it. Over back with the weaker foundation, a lot of these skills are just ignored. Okay, so now maybe by third grade, this is the testing year, so the teacher realized, oh dear, this is a huge gap. We have a big problem here. So the teacher is able to get the child with this missing. These first two are missing, grades 1 and 2. There was no foundation there. So with the teacher now having to go back to reteach first grade and second grade, basically the teacher is not going to be able to completely close the gap for third grade. But in general, okay, and this is how the pattern continues. Okay, again, you have all these learning gaps, so it's going to basically look the same where only partial comprehension is taking place. Okay, good. Now, okay, I'm just going up the ladder. Okay, and now in fourth grade, because each school year there's a particular standard that's really pushed. I know in 4th grade, when you think about math, that happens to be fractions. That's when the students really begin to work hard and strong on fractions, okay? And then decimals are introduced as well. So now if the steps are missing when by the time the child gets to 4th grade, and there are so many gaps in learning, okay, all those prerequisite skills that the child needed to master fractions, look, it's missing. It's not there. So when the child gets there, there's naturally going to be a big gap in fractions, okay? That's 4th grade. Just meeting partial skills, partially mastering the skills, okay? Now this child, remember, because the child received some tutoring, then that gap was closed. And we'll talk about tutoring later, because not all tutoring makes sense, okay? Because I believe in one of the videos also we talked about the fact that if a parent gets tutoring just to, and I call it isolated tutoring, but if you just get tutoring just to close one particular area and there are gaps everywhere else, for example, in this student's case, just getting a tutor to work on one area, I don't know, it's probably going to make a small difference, but then you have all these other areas. Okay, so we're going to talk about the type of tutoring that has to take place to take care of that situation. Okay, great. So with tutoring, these gaps are being closed to a great extent. Great. All right, so I need to move along, so I'm just trying to hurry here. And then 5th grade, by the time the child gets to 5th grade, okay? So, these areas were nice and strong for this student, so let's go ahead and just shade them in. Okay, tutoring took place, and even for the areas that tutoring did not fix, you notice that they're not that big, not huge, not so huge that the whole vessel is going to sink, okay? Right, so here we go. We're strong here. Right. Now here's the part that creates the problem. You see, in both cases, when the report card comes home, this student gets a PR, and this student gets a PR. So that throws the parent off. Why? Because this child also gets a PR, because if you're meeting the basic requirement for that grade, you get a PR. Let me explain this a little better to you. The PR scale begins at 70%. And if your teacher really likes you, it starts at 65%. So now it goes all the way up to, of course, 100 and above, right? So basically, this parent is misled, because here you are thinking that PR means A, because yes, it can go anywhere from 70% to 100%. But where exactly does your child fall? And when you get that report card and it says PR, how do you know if your child is at a 65% or 100%? I will tell you, in both cases, each parent will tell you, oh, my child is getting an A. Only one of them is right. And again, referring back to a previous video, This is my oblivious parent, and I call them subconsciously oblivious because this parent, they see a PR, they think it means an A. Okay? Here's when this parent gets a wake-up call. This parent will then get a wake-up call when the child is ready for grade 6. Hence my drop-off zone. Okay? Let's speed this up just a bit. Okay? So this here is the open water. Remember when I gave you that analogy about how the buffer, they said that the buffer would drop off, and that's kind of what gave me a little bit of peace. And I said, oh, well, it's not going to bother me. It's not going to take my lake away. This here is your open water. Out here, this is your open water. Okay. Now, what's going to allow the child water to stay afloat in this area? Here's your drop-off zone right here. Keep watching. Now, this is where this student here, the weaker foundation, they're going to fall off. And going into 6th grade, they're going to begin to get grades like C's, D's, and F. This parent is going to be annoyed. What's going on? How do you go from an A to a C or a D? This is not my child. Yes, this is your child. This is your PR scale. You thought your child was getting an A. Now, what's the difference that will cause a student to be able to survive in this open water? Is when they have a stronger foundation. Now this student, let's fill in our gaps, okay? So what we're gonna do is fill in the gaps so that you can really see. So all the little, actually let's make that a different. So let's shade in our gaps with yellow so that you can see, okay? So all where we have yellow is where we have learning gaps that were never dealt with because parent just thought everything was great. Parent says, oh, I don't have a problem. My child's report says PR, so you're not talking to me. We are good. And in some of the other videos, you're going to see where I kind of share with you how I think it's so unfair because the child doesn't know that this is happening. I think the parent has to be the one to take action here. Okay, so now look at the gaps in this foundation, and when you think back of the analogy that I gave you with the little paddle rowboat, now maybe you can make some sense of it. Why, as soon as you stopped paddling, why the vessel began to sink instantly. Okay, all right. Now that you're looking at these foundations, maybe now it will begin to make sense, okay? Now, first of all, remember what kept the buffer, the vegetative buffer, what kept it growing out into the water? You know what kept it growing out into the water? Because it had earth beneath it. It had a degree of earth, soil, and you know, it was just made that way from the time that they created this lake. That's the way it was designed. It was designed like this. You had the soil here, and then it was made to fall off, and then the water continued. So all beneath this area was earth and soil. So that's how the vegetation kept on growing. But then it could not grow here because now there were no more soil out here or earth beneath it. Now you needed to sink or swim. Okay, so what represents the earth for your student? What represents the earth for your student is the classroom teacher. See, a lot of students are 95% dependent on the classroom teacher. and they do no work without that teacher. They come home and homework is done in 5 minutes. There's no additional reading, no additional research, and maybe parents are just a little preoccupied and cannot help. And I never blame parents, because I know all parents, we do the best that we can, okay? But just showing you how it happened. So the teacher kept the child afloat, and then you had your PR, because yeah, the teacher, and maybe the work was just constantly being broken down, so that they just had to master just a little bit to receive that PR. So now, here's where the separation takes place. Like I told you before, that the system has a way of separating the wheat from the chaff, okay? And that's how it happens, because again, these students receive the same resources as these students. If we have to be, if we'll be honest, we can say that this group of students received the same education they did. Okay, I don't see a teacher that's going to withhold the knowledge. The same thing is happening. It's just that this student built a stronger foundation, maybe due to other input from parent, whether it was a tutor that worked with the child, or maybe just someone that was constantly saying you have to do additional work. Go home and practice more on this topic that you learned in class today. Do a little extra research. Close those gaps, okay? But that's what happened when this weaker foundation was not addressed, okay? And the problem that I have with this is that I think, again, it's unfair, because I kind of feel sometimes like, when I think about the fact that there are no cures for a lot of simple diseases, I feel like some of these diseases are so simple compared to the other things that we've been able to achieve. And, you know, as humans, just the accomplishments that we've made, including putting a man on the moon, I mean, that's huge. And to not be able to come up with a cure for some of these simple ailments, I question it. And I always say, sometimes this particular student got here because they're just sometimes DNA, they're just naturally bright. They naturally catch on. It's just in them. Okay, like it or not, some students are just like that. Learning comes natural to them. Okay, so they're going to excel regardless. But a lot of times, these particular students, where it comes natural to, doesn't always mean that they want it, or that they appreciate it, or that they take it very far. Now, I always wonder, back to my point, what if this student was actually designed to come up with a cure, and they have that ambition to come up with this cure, but because they were not fully developed academically, then they were never able to fulfill that purpose. And as a human race, we continue to suffer and struggle with this particular illness, disease, ailment, just because we did not help to develop this learner here. Okay? And that's why it matters to me. All right? That's your learning gap. I hope I explained it properly to you. And I do want you to know that both of these students, both of these foundations could look the same. Both of them could have zero gaps, and it is possible. There is a way.
Welcome back. That's the ASF Learning Gap Breakdown. I hope I explained it adequately to you. I also want to express that these foundations could look the same, both of them. It's possible that both of them could have zero gaps, because there is a way. So, how do you monitor the development of learning gaps? Well, every child requires an academic success plan, one that systematically and routinely tracks the retention of foundational skills.
That is what every parent must do to secure a child's future alignment. Left unattended, learning gaps do not self destruct, they destruct the self, and they become more detrimental to academics over time. They become hardened and ultimately fossilized. So, if we refer quickly back to our little analogy, let's say that when the first grade student began to develop gaps, if those gaps were instantly dealt with, there would be no problem. Upon arriving at the drop off zone, which is the border between primary and secondary learning, this particular child would not be in any academic danger. The drop off zone also indicates a branching off episode I call the Great Divide, which will be discussed in a subsequent video. After primary or elementary school, children enter middle school and are assigned to classes of varying levels of complexity. For example, 4 math classes may be offered to sixth graders ranging from basic to advanced. However, a particular group enters the low performing math, while another group with a stronger foundation enters the actual sixth grader math courses. Essentially, this branching has serious consequences for the low performer, officially on path to miss out on achieving their greatest academic potential and best life. Learning gaps will widen unless they're dealt with early. As seen in the demonstration, this is more than a theory, it's a fact. It's a movement. The longer it takes to deal with gaps, the harder they become and the more difficult it is to close them. Why? Because the child, based on the natural human growth development elements, will develop an irrational attitude towards learning. Learning gaps form naturally, but only develop as learning obstacles when left neglected. So, if gaps are allowed to develop in a student in kindergarten throughout first grade and into second grade, then the child develops a theory for learning based on their former experiences. The gaps harden, fossilize, and become resistant to quick fix attempts parents often apply when it's too late. Okay, so with this information and knowledge, I hope my listeners will act and take some action. Here's the best way to deal with learning gaps: they must be controlled with an academic success plan. I do not support isolated tutoring where you have a tutor who will fix 1 out of 50 gaps. And no, I will not agree it's better than nothing. I believe if you're going to help a child, you need to enable the whole child. That means you need a consistent plan. So if it's a tutor, that tutor needs to have a plan, an academic success plan outline, or a tangible blueprint that shows how the child will get from where they are to where they need to be. Regardless of the approach to closing the learning gaps, an academic success plan is crucial. The best tutoring without a plan is useless. In the former video, I discussed the three-phase process of closing learning gaps and putting students ahead in achievement. To review, the plan focuses on closing past and present learning gaps in phase one. In phase two, we prevent future learning gaps from being developed. Then in phase three, the plan focuses on the learners becoming practicing experts. A stronger foundation and academic success plan for kids is not a fly by night concept. Instead, the initiative has strong scientific roots based on years of research and experience. It's been monitored, it's been recognized, and it's been proven. Therefore, we are a trusted organization developing a timely movement to provide equal and ethical learning experiences for every child that aligns with their greatest potential and lifelong success. If you're interested and desire to learn more, please reach out to A Stronger Foundation to get information on upcoming workshops and information sessions. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. Please like and subscribe to this channel and share with the people dear to your heart. Thank you for listening. I invite you to continue learning about the Academic Success Plan for Kids initiative by watching the following videos explaining the brain's role in learning.